I think when growing up, most people have a short list of films that seem to stay with them long after their childhood. Films that our parents showed us as kids that will always hold a place in our hearts, whether they're actually good or bad movies. And for me, one of these films is Dumb and Dumber, the 1994 comedy hit that really launched Jim Carrey's famous career, and a film I enjoyed watching over and over again as a kid for years. My dad really enjoyed this film, and it's one of the very few that he'll still sit down and watch. I found it very funny when I was a kid, and I still find it funny today. I still genuinely laugh when Lloyd crashes his limo because he's staring at Mary, or when Harry tries to strangle Lloyd for not offering him his extra glove sooner.
Hey! You're freezing!
And I still hope with every watch that they get on the coach at the end of the movie. It's a really important film to me, so you can only imagine how excited I was about the announcement of the sequel back in 2014. Well, I went, I watched it, and part of me never left that cinema. That was 5 years ago, and it still annoys me enough that I felt compelled to make a video about it. I couldn't believe how horrendous the film was. It made the prequel movie look good. Seems to be a lot of that going around. I'll try and keep this as short as possible, but here are my biggest complaints about this missed opportunity. If I wasn't so blinded by joy at the time of its release, I probably could have seen this very minor detail as a sign of bad things to come. It's not smart because it's not entirely dumb. It's deliberately dumb, which isn't particularly funny. I know it's a real nitpick, but in hindsight it shows right away how seriously the creators were taking the project. This usually doesn't matter all that much in comedy films, as the vast majority of what's interesting comes from the performances, comedic timing, and the material. However, I couldn't help but be constantly aware of how awful this film looked. It looked like a below average daytime soap or your typical SNL sketch. Everything is lit, everything is just blasted by light. The pictures are flat as fuck and saturated to death. Look around you, nothing looks like this in real life. It also doesn't help Carrey or Daniels, as the overly sharp digital picture really emphasises how old they look. I'm not hating on them for being old, it just doesn't help when I keep thinking to myself how much older they are, and how this movie really should have happened 10 years earlier when Jim was on a decent streak. If you didn't know, Tom Cruise actually only does movies if he's shot on film, because he feels digital cameras make him look older. Alright, it's basically the same plot as the first, just much worse and far less interesting. Harry and Lloyd come into the possession of an important item which they decide to transport across the country. And whilst all this is happening, some bad guys try to kill them and take back the item. Well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I can't dispute that, but you might want to refrain from covering a perfectly good vehicle in bucket loads of shit. Nothing is particularly entertaining or meaningful in any form. Sure, the original isn't a masterclass in plot, but to some extent you feel the story gravitating towards its end, and you want Harry and Lloyd to come away with something for all their efforts. The new film doesn't really build towards its ending, and more importantly, I never get the feeling that Lloyd and Harry are really the key players in their own story. It's about them, but the B story about Penny and her parents seems much more important than anything going on between Harry and Lloyd. In the original film, the guys struggle with daily life, and Lloyd uses Mary as an excuse to do something interesting. However, in doing that, he uses his best friend, and their relationship gets put on the ropes for a few rounds. There's nothing of this depth in the sequel. They just go and do things, just cuz. And it wasn't really about getting a kidney, because Harry was just faking it. And it's hard to say either of them really cared much for Penny, because they get over not being related to her in seconds. Not to mention the uncomfortable dynamic of seeing a 52-year-old man fantasizing about a girl in her mid-20s. Almost every conversation is purely expositional. Characters just yap about everything they are thinking and what they plan on doing, especially these two. I had imagined a few possibilities for the story, but my main thoughts were, how are Lloyd and Harry dealing with middle life? What jobs do they have? Did they really spend all that money, or did they keep some? What's been going on for 20 years? And apparently, the answer is nothing. Nothing has happened. They even make a little inside joke about how long it's taken to make this movie, which again makes a point about how self-aware this film is, and that tonal decision really didn't sit right with me back in 2014, and it still doesn't today. The worst offence of this film is how it depicts Harry and Lloyd. It is a complete character assassination of one of cinema's funniest on-screen duos. Yeah, a lot of that going around lately. In the original film, Harry and Lloyd are idiots. Don't get me wrong, they are total morons. However, although they may not be very good at it, they clearly have the competence to work jobs, live somewhere, interact flirtatiously, ski, drive supercars, conduct sabotage, and understand at least on a basic level how sex works. But in the second movie, they are portrayed as having what I can only assume is legitimate special needs. They are so borderline retarded, there's actually a moment where neither of them can count to 3. There's like this desperate need to make every single line a joke, and that leads to a quantity over quality situation where you just get fed below par jokes constantly. I mean, humour is subjective, and I can acknowledge that different people find different things funny, but for some strange reason, most of the jokes are just flat out mean. Lloyd repeatedly makes fun of a Chinese lady just because of how she speaks. They both laugh at the idea of women doctors. Harry snatches money from Penny like some freeloading asshole. They yell, "Show us your tits," at a female professor. They confuse an Asian man for a Mexican. They really dig Freda for not being as attractive as she used to be. And Harry gives his daughter a cork when she comes to him about her first period. The comedy throughout is just really shallow and one-dimensional. It mainly relies on grossed out comedy, verbal abuse and fart jokes, which, don't get me wrong, I do like sometimes, but it's not what made the original so popular and lasting. There are a few funny moments. I did laugh hard when Lloyd is making out with the truck and the doorbell joke, but they are effectively just rehashed copies of the originals. What sealed the absolute deal for me, however, was when they revealed that neither of them actually had sex with Freda Felcher, and going so far as to say that neither of them know what sex actually is. I always remember the gag from the original film where Lloyd accidentally makes it too clear that he knows Freda, implying that he was in fact the other guy that Freda left Harry for. It's subtle and clever, and it's one of those jokes that I had to grow up first in order to understand properly. Being 50 years old and not understanding the mechanics of sex is beyond stupidity or dumbness. It's genuinely concerning, and the effect is I end up feeling sorry for Harry and Lloyd, and anyone who comes into contact with them. And that's something you repeatedly feel in this movie, that nobody likes them. Everybody wants to get away from them as soon as possible. They aren't harmless goofs like they are in the original. Also, everybody in this movie is really stupid. The bad guys are idiots, the good guys are idiots. What works in the original is how Harry and Lloyd manage to somehow exist in a very formal setting. None of the side characters are dumbed down, they actually barely make any mistakes, and the bad guys really mean business. It's just that Harry and Lloyd have such energy, luck and money that they can either unintentionally charm people or just buy their way into places. Pretty much everyone just thinks they're either eccentric or pretending to be outrageous. My point is, these guys are not the same people as these guys. They may dress exactly the same, another ridiculous decision I might add, but they don't speak, think or act the same as the original Harry and Lloyd. And that's what upset me the most. I felt the original characters had been betrayed, and to make it worse, they had been betrayed by the original team. How did this happen? How did the Farrelly brothers write this, to then have Jim and Jeff go along with it? Jim Carrey, in my opinion, is one of the most talented actors in the world, not just for comedy. As a performer, he has the genuine and super rare ability to leave a lasting impression on you. The script for Dumb and Dumber 2 is just simply below him, and it's below Jeff Daniels. Why would they do this? Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I hadn't seen the movie since it came out in 2014 and I really didn't want to, but for the purpose of this video I did rewatch it because I just couldn't remember much of the plot. Thankfully it was available on Netflix because the thought of paying for it separately was actually stressing me out. Ultimately I was just sad more than anything about the quality of the finished film. It's not like the usual sequel scenario where a movie is a surprise success and the studio orders an immediate follow-up that gets bashed out in half the time. The creators had 20 years to think about the follow-up story. 2 decades. That's almost my entire lifespan at the time of release. And it was just a real letdown. Anyway, feel free to comment your thoughts on the film, I'd love to hear them. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. I intend to do more videos like this in the near future, so please subscribe and ring that bell if that's something you're interested in. Laters.